But that statistic means nothing. The real question is not, do you believe in God? But first of all, in these days, which God do you believe in? When I was a chaplain in the Royal Air Force, I was called the OD chaplain, the other denominations. They called us the oddbods. And we had everything that the C of E and the RC chaplain didn't have. That was the Church of England and the Roman Catholic. So when a whole bunch of new men arrived at the station, the three chaplains would meet them all, and the Church of England would have first pick, and he would say, everybody christened C of E, come with me. And maybe 3/4 would leave. Then the Roman Catholic would get up, and he would say, in a broad Irish accent usually, all the Catholics come with me. And then everything that was left, I got. And I got Presbyterians, Methodists, Salvation Army, you name it, Baptists, a lot, brethren. But I also got Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists, and I also got agnostics and atheists. I really enjoyed my job to look after such a mixed bunch. And I used to say, how many Methodists here? Few hands to go up. How many Presbyterians? Few more hands. How many Baptists? How many brethren? How many Salvation Army? And then in the same tone of voice I said, and how many Christians? And this caused consternation. And they would look at each other along the road to see if anybody was putting their hands up. I said, come on, you put your hands up when I asked you the other questions. Why can't you put your hand up now? Oh, well, sir, what is a Christian? Well, I said, what do you think is a Christian? And invariably they said, someone who keeps the 10 Commandments. I said, okay, we'll accept that. Who keeps the 10 Commandments here? And one of them would say, oh, but you can't, nobody can keep them all. I said, okay, we'll accept that. What do you think is the pass mark? And they said 6 out of 10. And so I used to say, okay, I'll accept that. A Christian is someone who keeps 6 out of the 10 Commandments. How many Christians are there here? And so we went on. It led to a terrific discussion, and that was the beginning. But the most interesting part was welcoming atheists. And I would welcome each atheist in my office and say to him, I'm your chaplain. If you die while you're here, and half our pilots were dying then, and I'll have to bury you, I want to make you a solemn promise. I will not mention God at your funeral. I will not read from the Bible. I will not pray. And I certainly won't sing a song about God. I'll simply say, this man is dead and gone. And I found that there are many people who are happy to live as an atheist. They're not so happy to die as one. That's a bit of a risk. And so that would lead to a good conversation. And then I said, sit down and tell me what kind of God you don't believe in. And after they told me, I could say to them, you've just turned me into an atheist. Because I don't believe in that kind of God either. The important thing is not do you believe in God, but what kind of God do you believe in? We are hearing everywhere today that God is love. Now the Bible does say that, almost at the very end of the Bible, and in a passage that is not discussing what God is like. But those 3 words have become people's creed almost, that God is love. And there's an adjective been attached to it lately called unconditional love of God. And that's doing a lot of damage. And I want to comment on that this morning. What does the unbeliever understand unconditional love to be? Well, I can tell you. There are two men living in England in the county of Essex who are married to each other. Because now in English law, 2 men can marry and 2 women can marry. And these 2 men have married. And they lived together for a time, and then they decided they wanted children. And it's a little difficult for 2 men to have children, as you know. And they got hold of a woman in Florida in the United States, and they said to her, "Will you be a surrogate mother and give us a child?" And she agreed, and the sperm of one of the 2 men was injected into her womb, and she conceived, and she bore a child to them. Then they discovered that you cannot, by law, import a baby into England. And they couldn't get a license to get the baby in. Well, they went through a process of law, and they finally got permission to import a baby into England. Well, they then thought, let's have 2 children, and then we're a family. And they did it again, and the lady in Florida gave them a second baby. So they took the 2 babies to the local Church of England to be christened, or baptized, as the church would say. And they took the babies along, and the vicar of the church was a bit hesitant to baptize these babies. And one of the men, the husbandman, if you like, the stronger of the 2, said to the vicar, "But God's love is unconditional. It is non-judgmental." And that's what he'd heard. He'd heard the phrase unconditional love. And to that unbeliever, it meant non-judgmental. That God will never judge anyone. That he loves us whatever we're like. And of course that also means that God would never send anybody to hell. And there are a lot of other implications of that which really are quite serious and run against a whole lot of things in the Bible. As soon as you say God is love, you invite criticism. You invite criticism of a God who allows suffering in this world. If God is love, why are so many people in the world suffering? That's the very first criticism that comes back. And the second is about the next world. How could a God of love send anybody to hell? And so immediately you say God is love, you invite questions about suffering in this world and suffering in the next world, neither of which the unbeliever thinks is compatible with a God of love. When I wrote a book on hell, I was interviewed all over Britain on radios and TV and so on. This astonishing person who believed in hell. And I'm a rarity in believing in hell. And so I would go into a radio studio, and the interviewer would say, "Well, Mr. Paulson, you've written a book on hell. How can a God of love send anybody to hell?" And I would always answer with a question in return. I learned that technique from Jesus himself. And I would say, "Where did you get the idea that God was a God of love?" And this baffled the interviewer. And they would stutter and stammer and say, "Well, didn't Jesus tell us that? Isn't that a Christian belief?" I said, "Well, actually, it is. But everything I've learned about hell, I've learned from Jesus. He's the only one in the Bible who talks about hell. Did you know that? Nobody else does. There's nothing about hell in the Old Testament, for a start, and that's 3/4 of the Bible. Paul doesn't talk about hell. John doesn't. Peter doesn't. The only person who talks about hell is Jesus. And then I would say to the interviewer, how do you explain that? That the person who told us about God's love firmly believed in the horrors of hell. Well, they would usually cut the interview short at that point, and I would get out of the studio earlier than expected.